Hello and good evening. This is a presentation on the cell life cycle, a future lesson that I'm actually creating for my curriculum next year. Now, this is a screencast demo done to demonstrate the purposes of copyright for a class known as EDU 590. My name is Paul Jacob Hardy, and you can find me on Twitter at Hardy P. Jacob. You might actually be my first follower if you choose to hunt me down and find me on Twitter, but you can also reach out to me through a number of other sources, including my own Weebly page. Now, to get us all started on this, we're going to be talking about the life cycle of cells, and we're going to be talking in broad strokes, but we're going to talk about primarily cell theory. Cell theory is this idea that all life is composed of cells and that all cells must come from other cells. So, a cell is the actual container that holds life. Now, to be a cell, you must have a semi-permeable membrane and a whole list of other things, but we'll get into that later. So, for this, we're going to talk about what are cells. Well, bacteria, if you've ever heard of those, which has been a topical thing at the moment, and the difference between them and viruses, which are not cells. Now, bacteria are composed of cells. In fact, they are a single-celled organism, and they are made of only one cell. But you may know already that you yourself are composed of multiple cells. In fact, you're composed of trillions of cells, all right? That means over 9 zeros of cells inside of your body. Now, that means that life can be composed of not just one cell, but can be composed of an incredibly large amount of cells. In fact, some of the biggest things on the planet may be composed of quadrillions or more cells, depending on how you define what contains one life form. You'll have to excuse me. I repeat myself sometimes. Now, that means that anything that you consider life has to have a cell, and that can be from a bacteria or to the elephant at the zoo or the giant trees that you'll see in forests. Those are all composed of single-celled or multicellular organisms. Now, cells have to come from other cells, and they do this through a process known as mitosis. So mitosis is this process of how one cell becomes two cells, and they divide into two separate daughter cells from one parent cell. And they do this in a cycle that scientists have actually figured out has a process or phases that happen. Now, this is something that we'll be going into future details later, but it is a general circular flow as we go from this interphase, this time where we are a regular cell doing our own thing, and then we prepare for that process of dividing by getting heavier, copying our DNA, and getting ready for that process and becoming two cells, in which case those two will start their own cycle all over again. So it continues over and over again. This is how you are created, because at one point you were just one single cell, and then over time that one cell became two cells, and those two cells became four cells, and on until they became the trillions of cells that make up who you are today. Now, this process means that all cells have to come from other cells. In fact, when it comes to life, like humans, we actually have what's known as a stem cell, which is one specific cell that can become almost any cell inside of the body. That means that a stem cell has the ability to divide through mitosis and then specialize in different forms of cells and become, for instance, bone cells or skin cells. Or in those cases, and then from there, once they've specialized, they can decide that they can continue to multiply and create more bone cells or more skin cells. And then in unfortunate cases, we might actually develop cancer cells as well. But that's a different topic, and we'll talk about that later, where mitosis goes wrong. So when we look at the cell theory, that is the idea that all life forms are cells and that all cells must come from other cells. Now, this process is a highly vetted idea within science and has a wealth of evidence that we will be covering in the future and explaining why those materials support this idea and why it has been commonly accepted as the explanation of what constitutes life. It's also one of the defining things of how we categorize things as not life. For instance, when you look at a rock, why is a rock not alive? But and you might be like, it's a rock, it doesn't do much. But how about this? Why is a computer not life? Well, computers can do many of the same things that we do, but they're not composed of cells. So that's been one of our defining ways to separate ourselves from these increasingly difficult ways to define what is life. So as we go forward, we'll be covering all of this material in further depth, but for now, we'll be moving on. So just to give some credits, this PowerPoint was given to us by Unsplash and Slides Carnival, and also many of the pictures I was using, for instance, my bacteria at the beginning there was borrowed from Gerd Altman, who is a Creative Commons license, and then Kevin Song created and the Animal Cell Cycle, which is a Creative Commons license. I'm sorry, Gerd Altman is using another program to have a that allows me to use it through a what allows me to use it in a purpose that are non-financial. I am not physically financially benefiting from this presentation. And then also the last one there is from ThoughtCo, where I took parts of their pictures of the types of cells and used that to present how different cells can arise from other cells. For instance, how a stem cell can become a bone cell or a skin cell, and how other bone cells can be produced from bone cells. So that process is all done through this. And finally, I just wanted to throw out back to Sarah Semi, Condensed, and other things from this group. They did a lot of the stuff and typographies for this PowerPoint. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope you weren't too bothered by my repetition and blathering. But I look forward to talking to you all soon and getting back to you in the future when we cover this material in more depth. Thank you very much, and I hope you all have a great night.